Welcome to Mind and Movement, getting smart about how you move. I'm Hazel. Thanks for joining me for this, our coffee and move session 11. Cheers to everybody who's done it every day thus far. Good work. Today I thought we would do a little bit of work around our pelvic movement. Many of us really have a coupling between our pelvis and our ribcage. So every time we move our pelvis, our ribcage just kind of goes along for the ride, which means that we don't generally have good stability between our pelvis and our ribcage, which means a lot of us have a big rib thrust, our abs on stretch, so we have poor kind of core control, and it means that when we're walking and running and moving our arms and moving our legs, that instead of getting full range of motion at the hip or at the shoulder, we actually just get a whole lot of movement in our lumbar spine, which is one of the reasons why many of us have sore backs these days. So the first movement we're going to do today is called the click clack. I'm going to sit up on this to show you to start with. You don't need one of these, but if you roll up a towel, it works really well. It's just to help you to get a bit of kind of a ramp to roll off. So this exercise is called the click clack. I've got that half roller under my feet, not my feet, my bum. My hands are gripping my knees and my arms are straight. It's really key that the arms are straight. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to move my pelvis back, move my pelvis forward, move my pelvis back, move my pelvis forward. So you'll notice that this isn't happening. This is not what I want you to do. See how when I'm moving my pelvis now, my ribcage is coming along for the ride and I'm really doing a big rib thrust. That's not what we want. My ribcage wants to stay in a neutral position relative to the pelvis, and I just want to move at the pelvis, right? So you'll see now, of course my ribcage is moving a little bit because it's on top of my pelvis, but you're not seeing this big thrusting motion. Also, you'll also see that I'm not bending through my arms. My arms are straight. My arms are not moving. So these are some things to cue into. Can you move your pelvis back and forward and you really feel coming back? You need to use your abs. Maybe. How are you doing this movement? It's another thing to ask yourself. Another way you could do this movement is pushing and pulling through the feet. You'll notice now that I am driving the movement by, when I'm coming forward, I'm kind of pulling my feet towards me on the ground. And when I'm coming back, I'm pushing my feet away from me on the ground. So your launch strategies for movements are really important as well. How are you actually doing movements? Yeah. So this is a click clack. I'm moving my pelvis. I'm not thrusting my rib cage. Cool. I think you guys got that. Click clack. Great exercise to do. The other thing you can do is, you can do that exercise here, just on the ground. It's just a nice kind of cue to have something to kind of roll over to start with. But another thing you can think about is just when you're sitting there, is can you move your pelvis like forward and back without moving your rib cage? So many of us are so coupled between the pelvis and the rib cage that when I ask somebody to do something like this, they'll start doing this, right? They just do, I'm moving my pelvis, but you can see that I'm getting a lot of extra rib thrust. So with my rib cage staying in the same position, can I move at the pelvis? Of course, you're going to see a little bit of movement, but not that huge amount when we're thrusting. It's just something to play with. And then the other one is, can you keep the rib cage, can you keep the pelvis still and just move at the rib cage? So I'm going to kind of put my hands on my pelvis to make sure I'm keeping it still, and then can I move at the rib cage? And it's a very different movement pattern because I'm used to doing, taking my pelvis along for the ride and moving my rib cage too. But when I keep my pelvis still, I have to really think about how I'm moving my rib cage. Just some things to think about. And in 4-point kneeling position, I say this a lot whenever I bring somebody into this position for the first time, is a lot of people will be tucked. So if you watch my pelvis, it's tucked under, right? So this part of my pelvis, I've kind of got my tail between my legs. And when I say to a lot of people, relax their pelvis, what they do is they thrust their rib cage, right? So you want to be able to relax your ribcage, but then lift your ribcage back up. So I'm relaxing my pelvis, but lifting my ribcage back up. So I'm not in this position. I'm just in this nice, chilled out position, which is a position that we can practice an exercise called the rhomboid push-up, which is just me moving my scapula around my back. You can do a couple of those. Drop your neck out, because many of us, when we first do this exercise, do it with our traps. So drop your neck right out, and you're just taking your scapulas around your back, and you're checking to make sure your pelvis hasn't gone back into that tucked position. And yeah, just play with that there. Then the next movement we're going to do is a squat prep position. So what I want you to do is watch your pelvis from this 4-point kneeling position, and then you're just going to come back. So if you watch my pelvis, you'll see that as I'm coming back, it's not tucking, not tucking, not tucking. Great. Come back up. As I'm going to do it incorrectly this time, so I'm going to start tucking my pelvis under. So you just want to go to the point where you notice. If you notice that you start tucking there, just go to there and hang out there and start to get that more open hip movement through the back here, because it might be that your hamstrings are tight, that they're pulling on those ischial tuberosities in your butt and pulling you back into a tucked position. So just see if you can keep your pelvis in a more neutral position there. It can also just be a movement habit. You've got into the habit of, moving your pelvis a lot instead of moving your spine a lot instead of moving at the pelvis. So lots of people just have the habit of moving here rather than moving at the pelvis, which is, it's just a movement pattern that you have that you want to eventually get out of. So you've got to really practice mindfully when you want to change movement patterns. Jay Deshary, who's a really great running teacher, he says that, when he's giving somebody a new exercise and they actually, let's say, don't have the recruitment between their brain and their glutes, he's like, it takes about 7 on a scale of 1 to 10 of mental concentration to actually link in and get that brain connected to that muscle group or that movement pattern. So a lot of the time when you're doing new movement, it's going to be really challenging and you're going to have to think a lot and feel a lot. So if these movements are foreign to you and you're like, I can't do them, don't give up. You can do them. And this is what changing your movement patterns is all about, because if you just go, oh, I can't do it, you're just going to strengthen yourself in the same pattern that you have, which is ultimately just going to lead to your problems getting worse. And nobody wants that. So the next one we're going to try, I'm just going to put the camera up a bit, is a hip hinge. I'm just going to do it on the ground here, but we're going to do it with a broomstick. Everybody's got a broomstick. If you don't have a broomstick, grab your vacuum cleaner handle or whatever. So you'll see here that I have got the broomstick on my lumbar spine around my sacrum. I've got it on my T-spine, and I've also got it in my head, around my head. So you can hold the stick however you like. Let me hold it like that so you can see better. But you're just going to practice a hip hinge here, keeping your pelvis and your rib cage in the same alignment. So many people will do this. They'll just come in, their habit is to start bending their back. So you'll notice that your head or your T-spine or part of the stick comes off. So you want to just keep yourself on the stick. If you find that you can't get your head on the stick, because in this position you're really having to do this, what I want you to do is bring your chin back and see if you can get it on the stick there. If that doesn't work, if you're still like this, you've got a bit of forward head. So lots of us have got a bit of a forward head. You need to get into things like thoracic extension. So let's do a little bit of that now to finish off with. So this is thoracic extension. I've got a roller, half roller. You can just roll up a towel, a rolling pin, roll up in a towel works really well for this too. I'm putting it somewhere in my thoracic spine. I am putting my hands behind my head and I'm keeping my ribs down. I'm using my abs to keep my ribs down, not my pelvis. lots of people, when you say keep your ribs down, they'll do this. Watch this. They'll just tuck their pelvis back. So it's not pelvis movement, it's ab movement. It's using the abs to get your ribs down on the ground and then keeping your ribs down on the ground. Can you take your thoracic spine back into a little bit of extension? So it's just a small movement, and what you don't want to see is this. If this comes up off the ground, this is not thoracic extension, it's lumbar extension here. So we want to keep this on the ground and open up through the thorax a little bit. Take some nice deep breaths in there. And while you're moving today, have a think about how your movement of your pelvis follows the movement of your ribcage or vice versa. And also see if you're not moving at the hip much, you might be moving at your lumbar spine. And if you don't move at the shoulder much, you might be moving at the lumbar spine. We'll talk about that more next time. Have a great day and have fun moving.